Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Om Vishnupad Paramamsa Parvacharyato Tadasata Shri Shri Mad Divine Grace A. Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki. All glories to some devotees. All glories to some devotees. All glories to some devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshuran Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanbitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So today is the auspicious appearance day of Lord Ramachandra. And I'm going to explain a few things that I remember well, and then I'll resort to my notes and we will go over some lesser known details of the pastimes of Lord Ramachandra, because the Ramayana is actually quite large, so there's lots of different things in it. It's hard to remember any sizable proportion of those things that are in the Ramayana, but I did some review this morning. And to start off, I'll read a couple of verses from Srimad Bhagavatam in the 9th canto, where we hear about Lord Ramachandra's pastimes, and hope to get the mercy of Lord Ramachandra. I regret that you're having to hear Ramachandra's pastimes for someone that is as dry and has so little realization as me, but I'll try to do my best, and if you all pray for me and give me some mercy, maybe something auspicious will come from this today.
Where are you going to be reading from, Maharaj?
Yeah, it's 9:10:1. I think that's what it is. Yeah. Shri Sukha Uvacha Katvanga Katvanga Dirgabahuscha Ragus Tasmat Pritu Shrabaha Ajastato Maharajas Tasmadasarato Bhavat. Sukadeva Goswami said the son of Maharaj Katvanga was Dirgabahu, and his son was the celebrated Maharaj Raghu. And from Maharaj Raghu came Aja. And from Aja was born the great personality Maharaj Dasarath. Tasyapi Bhagavanesa Shakshad Brahma Mayo Harihi Amsam Shena Chatur Bhagat Putratvam Pratita Surai Rama Lakshmana Bharata Shatrugna Iti Samgyaya. Being prayed for by the demigods, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Absolute Truth Himself, directly appeared with His expansions and expansions of the expansion. Their holy names were Rama, Lakshman, Bharata, and Shatrugna. These celebrated incarnations thus appeared in 4 forms as the son of Maharaj Dasarat. Raghupati Raghava Rajaram Patita Pavana Sitaram Sitaram Jaya Sitaram Patita Pavana Sitaram. So Lord Ramachandra is known, I think, primarily for a few different things. One of the major things, of course, is that he appears to finish Ravana. Lord Ramachandra also is known for his marriage to Sita Devi, where he only had one wife, and that was Sita. And we also see that Lord Ramachandra is known as the epitome of good government. So he ruled for thousands of years, and he was the best example of what a good government should be like. Everyone respected and loved him. He was very fair, and we know that he even went out of his way just to show that he was not partial to anyone, including even his wife. So Sita, at the end of the Ramayana, we hear that Sita, although she was pregnant at the time, was banished by Lord Ramachandra because someone in the kingdom had suggested that Ramachandra was not impartial, that he accepted his wife back and he shouldn't have. So even though it was not true, even though Sita had proved her loyalty, even though the person making the accusation was not a very important person, Lord Ramachandra had Lakshman take Sita to a distant place where she eventually gave birth to 2 children who would be named Kusha and Lava. And they would grow up without their father in the forest, and eventually they would be taught the Ramayana by Valmiki, and they would begin to recite the Ramayana. And as they were traveling, the news of their wonderful recitation of the Ramayana would eventually reach Ayodhya, and Ramachandra would ask that these 2 mysterious young men be brought, and then eventually, of course, he realizes that they're his very own sons. So that's in the concluding chapters of the Ramayana. So, in one sense, the Ramayana deals a lot with the idea of highlighting these 2 starkly different personalities, Ravana and Ramachandra. So Ravana is like the perfect example. Ramachandra is like the perfect example of the good person, whereas Ravana is the perfect example of the tyrannical, self-absorbed, selfish person who was very powerful. So we have these two very contrasted. In the beginning chapters of the Ramayana, we find that Ravana, he wasn't born powerful like Hiranyakashipu was. He was approached Lord Brahma and performed austerities and asked that Lord Brahma give him the benediction that he would not be killed by any demigod or rakshasa or demon or sage or any powerful being. However, Ravana never asked not to be killed by human beings. And the reason he never asked to be killed by human beings is he didn't think he needed that benediction, because for him, human beings were not very powerful. He was powerful, maybe not the most powerful being in the universe, but he was more powerful than human beings, so he didn't bother with human beings. He didn't ask for that part of the benediction. So Lord Brahma granted this benediction to Ravana. Ravana then immediately became totally intoxicated with his own false ego. And one of the first things that Ravana did was to attack his own brother Kuvera. Kuvera, as we all might know, is the treasure of the demigods. So he is the most unlimited wealthy person in the universe. And he had an aerial ship called the Pushpaka airship. And Kuvera would visit various celestial realms with this airship. But Ravana wanted it. So he fought Kuvera and was successful because of this benediction. And he took away Kuvera's celestial airship. And then he went for a joyride on it. So Ravana was flying around through the universe. And his only purpose was to give mischief to others. He would try to find ladies that he would annex into his harem, and he would cause all kinds of trouble. When he would find a group of sages offering some kind of sacrifice, then Ravana would dump stool and urine from his celestial airship on the sacrifice, polluting it and making it worthless, so that the sacrifice was useless. And he would just go anywhere he could think of. And one time, when he was traveling in his airship, he was traveling over some hilly, mountainous area. And he saw something that he didn't usually see. And that was that there was a sage offering sacrifices in the forest. And he looked closer and saw that the sage was a lady, was not a man sage, and she was very attractive as well. So Ravana thought, well, I know sages, they go into the forest and engage in long sacrifices, living in solitary, but usually women don't do this. So he came down for a look, and this Vaishnavi was Vedavati. She wanted to be married to Lord Vishnu. So she was performing various sacrifices to please Lord Vishnu. And for Ravana, he thought, well, this would make a nice addition to his harem. So he grabbed Vedavati by the hair. And she had mystic powers, so she made one of her hands like a knife or something and cut the hair that Ravana had touched. and she said that she had been trying to develop purity all this time with all these difficult austerities. And the touch of Ravana had contaminated her, and she didn't want to live any longer. So once she had released herself from Ravana's grip, she burned herself, at the same time cursing Ravana that if he would ever molest another woman, that he would die. So Ravana gets cursed by Vedavati. And then Ravana is traveling further, and he sees Lord Shiva's carrier, Nandi, who sometimes is like a bull and sometimes kind of like a monkey. He's described in various ways. And he insults Nandi and Shiva at the same time. So he's traveling a place where he shouldn't be, and Nandi tells him this is Shiva's area, don't go here, don't disturb Shiva. But he insults Nandi, and so Nandi curses Ravana that someone like him will be the cause of his future destruction. So in the future, the monkeys will be involved in the destruction of Ravana. Ravana then goes to where Shiva and his wife Parvati are seated on a great mountain, and they are enjoying. And Ravana decides with his great strength to shake the mountain. And so he's shaking the mountain, and Parvati's wondering, is this an earthquake? I'm kind of frightened. And Shiva says, no, don't be worried. This is only Ravana, and he's trying to prove his prowess here. So Ravana starts to lift up the mountain, and as he lifts it up, Shiva pushes down on the mountain with his toe, and it kind of squishes Ravana under the mountain. So he is caught by the force of this mountain with Shiva on it, and he can't move. And he is trapped there. So after a while, Ravana sees that he can't just do anything and everything. So he becomes a little fearful and a little bit humble. And he asks other demigods what he should do. And the demigods say, well, you should ask forgiveness and offer prayers to Lord Shiva. So then Ravana begins to offer all these prayers, and he says various glorifications of Lord Shiva for 100 years. And finally Lord Shiva decides, okay. And he lifts the mountain off, and Ravana comes out. And so Ravana is at least a little bit given a little bit of humility by this particular episode. But it really doesn't last very long, because Ravana decides to continue. And while Ravana is traveling, he sees a king. And that king is named Anaranya, who Anaranya will be one of the four fathers or predecessors of Dasarath. He's in that same line. He's a king of Ayodhya, but this is before Dasarath. So he challenges Anaranya to a battle. And since Ravana has been given all these mystic powers, and he has all of his Rakshasas with him, he fights Anaranya for some time, and of course Anaranya is unable to defeat Ravana, and eventually Ravana strikes a fatal blow to Anaranya, and as Anaranya is dying on the battlefield, Anaranya says that one of my descendants will kill you. He curses him. So we see all these curses building up on Ravana. He is doing these various nefarious, selfish activities. And he's developing the animosity of various people. And he's accumulating curses. Of course, Ravana feels not particularly put off by these curses. He feels that he's so powerful that it doesn't really matter. And then Ravana finds out about Yamaraj. And Yamaraj is said to be one of the very most powerful demigods because Yamaraj is in charge of karma. He's the main being that judges people for whether they're sinful or pious. So Yamaraj becomes fixed as Ravana's next target. So he flies the celestial airship to Yamaloka. And there he sees hell. He sees people being tortured in hell in various ways. And he decides to harass the Yamadutas. So he's harassing them because he figures this is the best way to get Yamaraj's attention. And indeed it happens, that as he's harassing the Yamadutas and some people are escaping from hell and all this is going on. So Ravana is literally raising hell in hell. So eventually Yamaraj decides to come and attack. So Yamaraj and the Dunda Kala, the chastiser of time, and one other entity, I've forgotten which other entity was, let me see if I can see it here. Yeah, the rod of death, Kala, Dunda, and time factor. All three of them mount one chariot. And they are going to fight with Ravana. So actually, although Ravana thinks he's hot stuff, he is not making much progress against them. And eventually, Yamaraj is ready to throw an astra which will kill Ravana. But Brahma appears and says, "My dear Yamaraj," at this point Ravana is unconscious in the battle, but Brahma appears before Yamaraj and says, "My dear Yamaraj, you are not destined to kill him. You are a demigod. He has to be killed by a human being. So please desist from fighting him any longer." So Yamaraj goes away. And then when Ravana wakes up from being knocked unconscious, he sees that Yamaraj is going away and he thinks, "Oh, I've defeated him." So, but he doesn't really know what has happened. So in this way, Yamaraj leaves, and Ravana thinks, "Where shall I go next?" "Oh, I'll go to the heavenly planets, and I've seen hell, so now let's go to the other side." So he decides to go to the heavenly planets with his celestial ship. And there he sees an Apsara named Ramba, and he decides to enjoy with Ramba, and she's married to a demigod named Nala Kubera. I don't know if it's the same Nala Kubera that Krishna has a pastime with later on or earlier. I guess it must be later on, but I think not. At any rate, again, he forces himself on Ramba, and he is cursed by her husband that if he ever tries to force himself on a woman again, that he will immediately die. So another curse is levied onto Ravana. So Ravana is the example of what material desires are like when a person just completely gives into them. And he has the power and the strength to be able to just freely enjoy his material desires without any social restrictions, any legal restrictions, without any religious restrictions. So, of course, the demigods are becoming very disturbed by this character, Ravana, who is making all kinds of trouble everywhere. So they, like, what would happen later on when the demigods approach Krishna, they approach the Supreme Lord. And the Supreme Lord agrees that soon he will come and he will end Ravana's reign of terror. So the first opening chapters of the Ramayana kind of give us this overview of what Ravana is up to and why the demigods try to ask Lord Vishnu to do something about Ravana. And then the Supreme Lord explains that he will soon come, but some of the demigods should take birth in the family of Varanas, which are monkeys. So some of the demigoddesses become monkey women, and some of the demigods take birth in these various monkey families. So we have these Varanas, and they live in the forest, and their king is Vali, and they do various things. They are living kind of like wild animals to some extent, but they're intelligent. And later on, this will play into Ramachandra's quest to reclaim Sita after she is abducted by Ravan. So Ravan has not met Sita yet, and Ramachandra hasn't been born yet. And we hear that in Ayodhya there is a king at this point, and this king's name is Dasarath. And Dasarath has 350 wives, 3 of which are prominent, which are, of course, Kaushalya, Kaikeyi, and Sumitra. So Kaushalya is the eldest of the wives, and Kaikeyi is one of the younger ones. And Dasarath is kind of in difficulty because he has wanted a son, but he has no son. After trying for a long time, the only progeny that Dasarath has was one daughter, and her name was Shanta. And Dasarath gave this daughter to also a sonless king named Romapad. So Shanta was given to Romapad with the idea that some way or another this would help him in the future. So Dasarath hears from his ministers and his sages that he's consulting that he can perform a sacrifice. And if he performs this sacrifice, he will get 4 children who will be direct expansions of Vishnu. So he hears this declaration. But the sacrifice requires that Rishi Shringa perform the sacrifice. So there's this sage named Rishi Shringa. And if I remember right, Rishi Shringa was kind of peculiar in that he had kind of antlers like a deer does or something like that. And the other unusual thing about Rishi Shringa was that his father had wanted Rishi Shringa to remain brahmachari. So he had him in the forest. And Rishi Shringa's father went so far as that he removed all women from having anything to do with his son. I guess he didn't even have a chance to interact with his mother. So Rishi Shringa didn't even know that women existed. He had only seen men his entire life. So in this way, he was performing various kinds of Vedic activities on the order of his father in the forest. And because of this prophecy or this stipulation that Rishi Shringa had to perform the sacrifice, they had to figure how to get Rishi Shringa to Ayodhya. So eventually, they found some ladies who would entice Rishi Shringa to Ayodhya. So these ladies dressed up like brahmacharis, and they went to where Rishi Shringa was staying, and they began to say, "Oh, you are a wonderful sage. We are sages too, and we live not far from here. And so let us perform sacrifices together." And so they would perform various sacrifices together, and then they would say, "We have a specific custom in our ashram, and that is we say hello and goodbye, and we greet each other by hugging each other's bodies and touching lips." So they knew that Rishi Shringa had no concept of women at all. So in this way, they did this. And then one day they said, "Well, we have to go now because our guru is calling us away and we're going back to Ayodhya." So when they left, Rishi Shringa started to feel this intense separation. He didn't know what was going on, but he had been romantically attracted to them. But he felt this a separation. So eventually, he went to Ayodhya to find them, and eventually he would marry. So this shows that artificial renunciation never works. But Rishi Shringa then is given the charge of being the one who will do this sacrifice for King Dasarath. So a sacrifice is done, and I forget what the nature was of the sacrificial product, whether it was some fruit or some sweet rice or something like that. And this was supposed to be given to the queens of Dasarath, and when they would eat this, then they would become pregnant. So he gave half of it to Kaushalya, and he split the other half between Kaikeyi and Sumitra. So all three queens become pregnant. And as we know, Kaushalya will give birth to Ramachandra, that Kaikeyi will give birth to Bharat, and Sumitra will give birth to Lakshman and Shatrughna. That's what I'm trying to get out of my mouth there, Shatrughna. So everyone is happy that after this long time that King Dasarath has now finally managed to have children. Not only that, but there was kind of a drought and a very difficult time for agriculture in Ayodhya. But when Rishi Shringa came, it was also another benediction that wherever he was, there would never be any difficulty for rain or for any kind of drought or lack of sufficient foodstuffs, vegetables, grains, etc. So everyone was happy in Ayodhya, and these four grew very rapidly. And in some places, we see that Ramachandra, Bharat, Shatrughna, and Lakshman are described as the four Chaturvyuha. And in other places, they're described as the four items of Vishnu, the club, the lotus, the disc, and mace, etc., etc. So sometimes they're described one way, sometimes they're described the other way. And in this way, we find that these four grow very quickly. And we find that at one point, Vishvamitra Muni comes to get audience with Dasarath. So Vishvamitra Muni lived in the forest, and he would perform his various sacrifices in the forest with other sages. And what would always happen is as they were performing their various fire sacrifices, Ravana would send his Rakshasas, particularly Maricha and Subahu, and they would despoil the sacrifices by throwing various contaminated substances on the sacrifice. And they would wait till the sacrifice was mostly completed, just so that it would frustrate the sages most as it could be. So Dasarath sees Vishvamitra Muni, and he says, "Oh, my great Muni, whatever you want, I will do it," because this was a general custom of kings, that they would offer the sages anything that they might want. So he offers this benediction to Vishvamitra, and Vishvamitra says, "Yes, I have come with a specific purpose. And that purpose is that I have come to ask for your son Ramachandra, that I want him to kill these demons and Rakshasas that despoil our sacrifice every time we try to do it." And when Dasarath heard that, suddenly his whole emotion and his demeanor changed. He thought, but my two sons, Bharat and Lakshman and Ramachandra, they're too young. They're not ready to engage in battle yet. He said, rather, I will come. I will defeat these demons that are plaguing your sacrifice. And then Vishvamitra mentioned that they had been sent by Ravana. And when Dasarath heard that Ravana was involved, then he said, well, I don't think even I'll go, because Ravana is known. He killed one of my ancestors, so I don't want to tangle with Ravana. So Vishvamitra was, of course, very pleased when he heard that Dasarath was going to offer him any benediction that he wanted. And he was very angry. He was getting angrier when Dasarath was reneging on it. But Vashishta happened to be there as well. Later on in the Ramayana, we hear this story about Vashishta and Vishvamitra. They were at one time enemies, but later on they became close associates. So Vishvamitra is getting angry, and Vashishta calls Dasarath aside and says, my dear Dasarath, know for certain that your children are directly the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and they have nothing to fear from any demons or from Ravana. And if you renege on your promise to Vishvamitra, he will certainly curse you, and you will become disreputed in society. So I suggest that you allow these sons of yours to go with Vishvamrita. So somehow or other, Dasarath is convinced by what is said by Vashishta, and he agrees to let Lakshman and Ramachandra go with the sage Vishvamrita. So they depart. Of course, Dasarath feels separation, and he begins to worry, but really he has no reason to worry. And in the Ramayana, we hear that during the time that Ramachandra and Lakshman are with Vishvamrita, and they're traveling to where Vishvamrita stays, during that time, Vishvamrita tells them all kinds of stories, answers all kinds of questions, and various things. So they learn about lots of things. They learn about his story and the story of Vashishta. So Vashishta Rishi was a very powerful sage, and he had this Kamadhenu cow, this cow that could give any kind of thing, milk or whatever. And so one day, Vishvamrita at that time was not a sage, but he was actually a powerful king. So one day, Vishvamrita is traveling with his soldiers, many soldiers, and they come across Vashishta's hermitage. And Vashishta says, "Why don't you all stay? I will make prasadam for you all." And he's talking about thousands of soldiers. So, of course, Vishvamrita is kind of puzzled by this. How is this sage living in the forest going to somehow satisfy all my soldiers? But when the time comes, there's huge quantities of all kinds of opulent prasadam. And then Vishvamrita wonders, "My dear Vashishta, how did you make it possible to feed all my soldiers?" And so, Vashishta explains to Vishvamrita that I have a Kamadhenu cow that can produce unlimited quantities of anything, ghee or milk or foodstuffs or whatever I need. And she helps me in everything that I do. And so Vishvamrita says, actually, I'm the king. I think you should give this cow to me. That if you do, I will give you 100,000 cows. And Vishvamrita says, "No, I'm not interested." Or Vashishta says, "I'm not interested in 100,000 cows. This is my special cow. And she helps me with my sacrifices. I need ghee and so many different things. And she produces them as I need them. And therefore, I will not give you this cow." And this angers Vishvamrita. And he says, "I'm the king, you should give me this cow. If you won't give me the cow, I'll take the cow." So he sends his men to round up the Kamadhenu cow, the Sarabi cow. And as his men are pulling the cow away from Vashishta's hermitage, the cow is crying. And she asks Vashishta, "My dear Vashishta, why are you letting this crude man take me? I am yours. I do not want to go with him." And Vishvamrita is happy. He's thinking that this is working. But Vashishta says to his Kamadhenu cow, he says, "My dear cow, you should know that I'm a Brahmana and I do not get angry with people." That's the wealth of Brahmanas, that they are very even-minded over events like this. But you are quite capable of protecting yourself. If you want to stay with me, then you protect yourself. And so when Vashishta says this, then suddenly soldiers start to appear from her head, from her udder, from her side, from her legs. And thousands of soldiers, they come and they begin to attack Vishvamrita's army. And when it's all said and done, Vishvamrita's army is completely dead. They kill every one of his soldiers. And then Vashishta and the cow just go back to the hermitage. And Vishvamrita is left kind of amazed and frustrated. And he thinks, what's the use of being a king or a kshatriya? Brahmanas are the ones that really have power. Kings don't really have any power, not like that. So he decides, I will become a brahmana. So he gives his kingdom over to his eldest sons, and he goes into the forest and begins performing austerities. And he's performing various austerities, and he gets a lot of Brahminical power from performing these austerities. But he meets with Menaka, and there's an affair, and he has children, and then eventually he realizes that he wasted all of his potency by deviating, so he goes back to the forest. And then he is tempted by an apsara named Ramba that Indra sends. So Indra is trying to pull Vishvamrita away from his austerities because he's afraid that Vishvamrita will become the next Indra. So he sends this apsara Ramba to try to tempt Vishvamrita while he's performing his austerities. And Vishvamrita remembers what happened with Menaka, and then he curses Ramba that she will become like a stone for 1,000 years. And then he says, why did I curse her? I've given way to anger again lost some of my potency. So this time he decides he's going to just be very, very fixed. And he performs austerities for a very, very long time. And finally, Brahma and the demigods come to him and say, my dear Vashishta, you are very powerful. And what benediction are you after by performing all these austerities? And he says, I just want to become a brahmana and have the power of a brahmana. And Brahma says, well, you're already demonstrating that you have the potency of a brahmana, so what else do you want? And he says, well, let Vashishta declare me a brahmana. So they bring Vashishta, and Vashishta declares that, yes, you are a brahmana now, Vishvamrita. And then they become friends. And so then they travel together. They have other issues later on, but that's the one story that we find out. That so Vishvamrita and Vashishta have this story between them. And of course, when finally Ramachandra and Lakshman, they reach the place where these sages are, where Vishvamrita has his encampment, then they are ready. They're just beginning a sacrifice. So Lakshman and Ramachandra pledge that they will not sleep. They will guard the sacrifice in morning, noon, and night while this sacrifice continues. So the Brahmanas go through their mantras and they're performing their sacrifice on the altar. And then as it's almost completed, as the custom has been by the Rakshasas sent by Ravana, Maricha and Subahu come. And so when they come and they start to attack the sacrifice, then Ramachandra springs into action. And he shoots, I think, a Vishnu astra at Maricha. and it strikes Maricha in the chest, and it knocks him unconscious and pushes him 800 miles into the ocean. But he doesn't die. He just knocked unconscious. But Subahu is shot with the Agni arrow, and the Agni arrow kills Subahu. And then Lakshman and Ramachandra, they decimate all the Rakshasas that have come to support them in their mayhem. So the few Rakshasas that live through it, they go back to inform Ravana what has just happened, that there's this new young man whose name is Ramachandra, and he is very powerful. And he is something you should watch out for. And of course, because of this particular episode, Maricha is deathly afraid of Ramachandra. And that will be, again, play into the whole narrative as a later portion of the Ramayana, when eventually Ravana will ask Maricha to assume the form of a golden deer to attract Sita and therefore cause Ramachandra to be separated from Sita so that Ravana can kidnap her. So that will eventually happen. They run into Janak. Janak is another king, and Janak has a daughter named Sita. And so Janak came by this daughter in an unusual way. She wasn't born to him the way usually daughters are. He was plowing, and a baby appeared in the furrow, and he raised her. She was actually, the consort, the eternal consort of Ramachandra. But Janak didn't know where she came from exactly. And he was very attracted to her, and he saw her as his favorite daughter. And one day, because sometimes Sita, as a young girl, would clean things in the palace. And so one day, from a hidden location, Janak is watching his daughter, Sita, and there's this giant bow, that's the bow of Lord Shiva, giant bow. And it has been put on display because it was given as a gift to Janak. And so Sita is cleaning around it, and then she just lifts the bow up and cleans underneath it. A bow that like hundreds of men can't budge, but she's lifting the bow up and then she puts it back down. And at that point, Janak thought, well, now I know that if she ever marries somebody, he's got to be at least able to string this bow. So this is the stipulation that is placed. And because of their proximity there, and they go to that area, they are told about this. I think it was Vishwamrita that informs them of this whole episode going on, that Sita is looking for a husband, and the idea is that anyone who can lift the bow of Lord Shiva and string it could be qualified to be the husband of Janak's daughter. So, of course, there are many men there from various kingdoms, various kings and princes, and most of them can't even lift the bow, but a few who can lift the bow can't string it because it's huge. It's actually the bow of Lord Shiva. The story of the bow of Lord Shiva was that when the demigods refused to give Lord Shiva his share of sacrifice. I think this must have been during the Daksha episode, but I'm not sure whether that's the particular episode. But when the demigods refused to give Shiva his share of sacrifice, he created this bow and was going to fight with the demigods. But when they heard him twang the bow, they just immediately gave Shiva his share of sacrifice and didn't want to fight with him. So Shiva didn't have to use the bow. But eventually he gave the bow to Janak Maharaj. Somehow the bow came down and it was in the possession of Janak. So Lakshman and Ramachandra, they come into the arena, and all these men are struggling with this bow of Lord Shiva. But Lord Ramachandra immediately picks it up with one hand, and he pulls it back, and he pulls it back so strongly that the bow breaks into pieces with a huge boom, a huge sound as the bow of Lord Shiva cracks. And then immediately then Janak knows that this is the husband for my Sita. And he notices that Ramachandra has a brother, Lakshman. So he decides to give one of his other daughters to Lakshman. And then because they find out that there's two more brothers, there's Bharat and Shatrughna, then someone else, I think one of Janak's brothers has two daughters, and they are given to the other brothers. So there's a quadruple marriage of all the sons of Dasarath and these daughters of Janak and his family. So then they're married. And there's a huge procession. And the procession is going back from where Janak is to Ayodhya. And suddenly in the marriage procession, there's this huge wind and so much storm going on. And no one can understand what's really happening. It's a very mysterious episode. But then suddenly, the whole party realizes that it's Parasaram. Parasaram is, of course, the incarnation that killed the Kshatriyas so many times over. When the Kshatriyas had gone rogue, they had deviated from spiritual principles and refused to follow the Brahmanas. Then Lord Parashuram came to punish them by killing them all. So he had done that. And so he stood before Lord Ramachandra and he said, I've heard that you were very powerful and that you broke the bow of Lord Shiva. I have the bow of Lord Vishnu. And so let's see if you can string this bow. And if you don't string it, I will kill you because you're a Kshatriya. I'm afraid that you are another Kshatriya who will create mischief in the world. So he hands the bow of Vishnu to Ramachandra, and Ramachandra strings this bow with an arrow. And he says, you said you wanted to fight with me, and I should point this arrow at you, but I think that's not proper. So tell me where else I should point this arrow. So, of course, Parasuram and Ramachandra, they don't engage in combat. But Parasuram can understand now that this is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's an incarnation, I believe, Shaktavesha avatar. And Ramachandra is a direct incarnation of the Supreme Lord. So then Parasuram benedicts Lord Ramachandra, and the marriage procession goes back. And of course, we know that when they reach Ayodhya, sometime later, there's a visit to Ayodhya by one of the relatives of Bharat, who lives in a faraway kingdom, the kingdom of Kaikai, or Kaikai, I think is the name of the kingdom, but Kaikai, one of Dasarath's wives, came from that area, so she's called Kaikai, but the area is called Kaikai. And so one of the relatives comes to visit Kaikai, and he wants to show Bharat the area where they have originally come from, to take him back to Kaikai. So Bharat leaves, and he goes with his uncle back to Kaikai. And while he's gone, Dasarath discovers from his ministers and astrologers that right now is a very auspicious time to coronate a king, and that very soon something very inauspicious will overtake Dasarath. So he feels that I better do this right now. And since it's a great distance to the kingdom of Kaikaya, there's no time to dispatch a courier or a message there. So he decides that tomorrow we will coronate Ramachandra as the king of Ayodhya. So if something inauspicious overtakes me, we will have already a heir apparent, will have a king that will be set to take the throne. So this is what Dasarath has planned. And of course, everybody loves Ramachandra. And we see that that Ramachandra is always served by Lakshman, and we find that Bharat is always served by Shatrughna. So it's kind of like two groups. And at this time, a great happiness begins to flow throughout the entire kingdom. Everybody is preparing for the coronation, which is supposed to happen the next day, and everyone is very happy. And the news reaches everyone, including one interesting person named Manthara. Now, Manthara is an apsara, and she has been actually sent to facilitate and expedite the killing of Ravana. So she's indirectly setting up a series of events that will eventually cause Lord Ramachandra to be banished to the forest, and while he's in the forest, Ravana will kidnap Sita, and then Lord Ramachandra will search for Sita and eventually come to discover where Ravana lives. And as a result of that, then of course Ravana will be defeated. It was also one of the benedictions, I think, from Brahma, that Ravana had, he had 10 heads, but aside from that, he had a special nectar that was circulating in the area of his heart so that he couldn't be killed. And if any one of his heads were severed, it would just grow back. So that was one of the reasons why he was undefeatable. And Ravana lived in the area known as Lanka, what we call Sri Lanka today. And there, this kingdom was very wealthy. It had unlimited gold. Everything was made of gold, and everything was very opulent, and it was populated by Rakshasas. So this was Ravana's kingdom. So at this stage, though, Manthara hears that Dasarath plans to coronate Ramachandra. And in her mind, she thinks this must be to make sure that Bharat is not coronated. She thinks this is dirty work, that Dasarath has an ill-intentioned motive, that he's doing this because Bharat is out of town. So she then goes to Kaikeyi. So Kaikeyi is the one of Dasarath's favorite queens. She's the younger queen. And she tells Kaikeyi, do you know what's happening? Why everybody is so festive, and why all the commotion is going on in the city of Ayodhya? It's because your husband, Dasarath, tomorrow plans to coronate Ramachandra. And so Kaikeyi's immediate reaction to that is, that's the best news I've heard all day. And she takes off her pearl necklace and gives it to Manthara, saying, here, you have given me such wonderful news. I'm happy to award you this necklace. And Manthara takes the necklace and throws it on the ground. She says, you are a fool. You don't know what this actually means. That you and your son, Bharat, will now be excluded from the kingdom. Everyone will talk only about Ramachandra, and no one will care at all for you or your son or anything. You are unaware that this is the way that royal families work. But I know. So by her very materialistic thinking, by her envy, she eventually manages to poison Kaikeyi, and Kaikeyi begins to think exactly like Manthara does. And so, therefore, Manthara is managing to convince Kaikeyi. So eventually, when Kaikeyi begins to feel that this is uncalled for, then she begins to think, well, my dear Manthara, what should we do about this? And so, of course, the plan is hatched. We know that what Manthara explains to Kaikeyi is that once when Dasarath was fighting on behalf of the demigods, he was knocked off his chariot in battle, and he was saved by Kaikeyi. She came by with a chariot and was able to save his life. So Dasarath then gave her a benediction saying that whenever you want something from me, just come and I will give you whatever you want. And at that point, Kaikeyi had said, well, I can't think of anything at the moment, but if I ever do, I will tell you. So this was the promise that had been given some years before to Kaikeyi. So Manthara said, you should use this promise now. So you should dress very poorly. You should not comb your hair. You should go into the sulking room. Evidently, queens had a sulking room where when they were angry or frustrated, they would go somewhere and the king would know that they were in a bad mood. And so you should go there, and when the king approaches you, you should say nothing until he becomes very concerned about your welfare. And then you should ask him for this benediction. So, of course, this is what Kaikeyi would do. And King Dasarath, he can't find Kaikeyi, and he hears that she's in the back room there, so he goes there and he sees her lying on the ground with dirty clothes and looking very ragged. And he asks her what the problem is, and she doesn't say anything until he becomes very concerned about her. And then she says, well, do you know that one time, do you remember that you made the promise that whatever I ask as a favor, you would grant that favor because of the time that I saved you? And he said, yes, I remember. What would that favor be? Ask me anything. And then, Kaikeyi says, I ask that you, instead of coronating Ramachandra as the next king, you coronate my son Bharat, and then you send Ramachandra to the forest. And when Dasarath hears this, he goes to pieces. He says, I can't believe you're saying this. What have you got against Ramachandra? Everybody loves Ramachandra. You've always loved Ramachandra. Why are you saying this? And she says, are you going to keep your promise or not? And he says, ask me anything else. She says, you made a promise. You just promised me that whatever I would ask for, you would do that. And so Dasarath becomes completely disarranged. He doesn't know what to think. He becomes angry at Kaikeyi, and he is ready to reject her as a wife. And about that time, Ramachandra comes in to ask for some details about the coronation for him that's supposed to happen the next day. And Kaikeyi says, your father needs to tell you something, but he is not ready to speak. And so Ramachandra says, my dear father, what do you want to tell me? And Dasarath can barely get the words out, but he says that actually I have given a pledge to your mother here, Kaikeyi, that I will coronate Bharat instead, and that she asks that you go to the forest. So Bharat immediately accepts the idea. And then Dasarath says, but actually what I want you to do is to capture me and bind me and put me in prison and continue to be king. And Ramachandra won't do that. He says, if that's the stipulation, then that's what I intend to do. Of course, we know the story goes on. The story is quite long, and eventually it would come to pass that Bharat would be installed as king. But Bharat would try to give the kingdom back to Ramachandra, but Ramachandra was convinced to keep and make the word of his father Dasarath good, so he voluntarily leaves to go into the forest, and with him, of course, come Lakshman and his wife Sita. So they all three go to the forest. Bharat eventually agrees to accept the kingdom only until Ramachandra will come back at the end of their time in the forest of 13 years. And of course, they live in the forest very nicely for some time, even though it's very simple arrangements. But at one point, Ravana finds out about Sita. That, of course, happens when Ravana's sister happens to become attracted to Lord Ramachandra and proposes that she marry Ramachandra and that Ramachandra leave aside Sita. Of course, Ramachandra and Lakshman are talking with Suparnika, and they tell Suparnika, Ramachandra says, well, maybe Lakshman would be better for you. And so she thinks about it and says, but Lakshman says, but you would never be happy with number 2. You need to be associated with number 1. So they're joking with her, but she's taking it very seriously. And then Suparnika attacks Sita, and when she does so, then Lord Ramachandra asks Lakshman to interfere, and Lakshman cuts off her nose. So she runs away and she goes to tell Ravana, hoping to be avenged by this. And of course, she explains to Ravana that Ramachandra has a very beautiful wife that he might be interested in. So then that's when Ravana decides that he's going to check this out, and eventually he comes to know and see Sita, and he creates this situation where Maricha will take the form of a golden deer and decoy Ramachandra away from Sita. And when this happens and he kidnaps her, he takes her to Ayodhya. Eventually, Lord Ramachandra searches for Sita. He comes into contact with the monkeys, the Varanas, as he's searching. And Hanuman is the one who eventually comes to understand that Sita is being held in Lanka. And the monkeys they build a bridge of floating stones, and they begin to attack Lanka. Ravana has a brother, Vibhishana, who tries to convince Ravana that he's doing a big mistake. But Ravana becomes angry at him, so Vibhishana leaves his brother and comes to Lord Ramachandra, and Lord Ramachandra accepts him as one of his allies. And eventually, of course, there's a big war, and so many monkeys die, so many Rakshasas die. And Kumbhakarna, one of Ravana's brothers, who is huge, is used to try to finish Ramachandra, but it doesn't work, and instead Kumbhakarna is killed. And then, of course, they manage to defeat Ravana with a special arrow. So Ravana, who couldn't be killed otherwise, is defeated by Lord Ramachandra, and Lord Ramachandra rescues Sita, and they come back from Ayodhya. Then Ramachandra questions Sita's chastity, and she enters fire to prove that she has been always chaste towards him. And then, as we know, as we kind of wrap up this whole Ramayana, that one day, in disguise, Ramachandra is wandering throughout his kingdom, and he hears one man who is talking to his wife and saying, well, you were out somewhere last night. I don't know where you went. You were with some other man, and therefore I will not accept you back into my house like Ramachandra accepted Sita back. So based on this aspersion by someone in his kingdom, then Ramachandra makes the decision that he will exile Sita. So he tells Lakshman to take Sita away, and she goes to the ashram of Valmiki Muni, and there she gives birth to Kusha and Lava, and that's kind of we kind of compress the whole back end of the Ramayana, but this is kind of the overall story. I'll just end with that, and if anybody has any particular questions or comments, we can discuss. Yeah, do we have the microphone?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much. A special day today. I was pondering this idea of humility, and you talked about how Ravan, when Lord Shiva pushed the mountain back down in Ravan's hands, he actually started to become a little humble. But of course, that humility was stemming out of a desire for material comfort, or a desire for,
Right.
what he wanted to keep doing and enjoy his senses, become a conqueror. So I was wondering if maybe you could elaborate a little more on what the actual meaning of pure humility would be, and how we can embody that properly.
Well, humility is recognizing that the Supreme Lord is the goal and purpose of everything. And if that's the case, then we are not proud of anything we own because we don't own anything. We're not proud of anything we are because whatever good things we have or whatever good characters or quality we might have is only the mercy of the Supreme Lord. And we do not covet anybody else's situation, occupation, anyone else's wife or anyone else's material possessions or anything like that. So this makes for humility, as we hear that in the Shikshastakam that one should be more tolerant than a tree and more, what is it, one should be like a blade of grass, more tolerant than a tree. In this way, we are there for others, but we don't expect any respect in return. Mostly in the material world, people expect respect. It's a common thing. And this is not humility. So whenever we expect respect, we should examine our motivations. Now, sometimes people will simply make someone aware of some protocol that we have in our Vaishnava system of personal interactions. Like we offer deference to spiritual masters, sannyasis, temple presidents, etc., etc. So if somebody fails to do that, we might, make them aware of it. But if we genuinely feel that we have not been respected, and we have that kind of anger, it shows that we have false ego, which means that we are not really yet very humble. And being truly humble is not an easy thing to do. It means to do whatever the Supreme Lord wants, and to sometimes be very meek when there's an occasion for provocation. On the other side, it may mean the opposite. It means when there's some actual reason, devotees should be very strong, maybe even exhibit lethal force under certain situations. That's also being humble. So humility is the attitude of seeing the Lord as the goal and purpose of everything, and understanding how to please the Lord by the right attitude and the right activity in any kind of situation, and never thinking oneself the center or oneself being important or oneself possessing any good qualities or anything. So that's all part of humility. It's a tall order. Yes. Can you give the microphone?
When Raven went to the hellish planet, to hell, what did the Lord said? Why did he left? What did he heard? I didn't hear what the Lord told him, and then he left. He didn't
Are you
fight.
saying, why did Ravana go
Not Ravana, Yamaraj. Why did Yamaraj left? I didn't hear what the Lord said to Yamaraj, and he left.
What's that?
He didn't fight.
Right. Why did Brahma tell...
No. Why did Lord Yamaraj, he went to fight with Raven, but he didn't continue, he left. But
Right.
Why did he left? The Lord told him something?
Yes, Brahma asked him to desist. Brahma was the one that gave Ravana the benedictions. And Brahma also was aware that in the future Lord Ramachandra would come, and it would be Lord Ramachandra's position to kill Ravana. So he told Yamaraj, this is not for you. Just allow the destination of the whole pastime to, let the whole pastime just carry on the way it's intended to carry on, because Lord Ramachandra would come and eventually finish Ravana, and that would be very glorious, rather than Yamaraj doing it in hell, in the way it is. So that's why Brahma instructed Yamaraj that way, and Yamaraj simply accepted Brahma's instructions and ceased to fight.
What was the reason that Kaikeyi received his benediction from Dasaratha again? She saved him?
Yeah, as I remember, there was some battlefield scene where Dasaratha had been knocked unconscious or something like that, and his wife saved him. Kaikeyi saved him. There's another place where it's said that Dasaratha had what Prabhupada calls Whitlow. It's a medical condition. It has something to do with something wrong with your finger. I forget, I don't remember what Whitlow is anymore. So one of those things that you can Google and immediately find out because it's such a strange name, But
very painful and infectious viral disease of the thumb and fingertips.
Right. So somehow he was cured of that as a result of Kaikeyi too. I've heard both things, but
My other question.
Jai Shri Radha Govinda.
May I ask one more question?
Yeah.
In this pastime and many of the Lord's pastimes, this theme of absolute dedication to one's word
Yeah.
and truthfulness, it's really shaping the whole story, which I think for us in Kali Yuga is a little hard to understand.
Right. Definitely.
For us, giving your word or saying something is really somewhat inconsequential. So
Yeah, in
I
our
wanted to
Kali
ask
Yuga
you,
world, nobody does that.
How can we really understand, appreciate more these great kings and rishis, their absolute, even at the sake of banishing the Supreme Lord as your son? I mean, it's inconceivable. Like, what's more important? Maybe I'll just keep my son, but they're setting example. Actually, they're following this principle of truth. It's quite incredible. So if you can elaborate, maybe help us understand.
Yeah. That was one of the other main themes of the Ramayana, is that Lord Ramachandra came to vanquish Ravana, and he came to establish an ideal kingdom. And he also came to show how married life can be difficult. Those are kind of themes of the Ramayana. And in this particular case, Lord Ramachandra showed his dedication to principles which may or may not have our own interests in the flow of that principle. Our own interests may be exactly the opposite of the flow. And this was the hallmark of virtue, or the hallmark of following Dharma. Yudhishthira has the same kind of outlook, that there is some kind of situation set up, someone has said something, and therefore to keep the word, a Kshatriya will do whatever it takes to keep his word. If a Kshatriya claims that I will either defeat or die, then he either defeats or dies. If a Kshatriya claims that I will give a certain benediction, then he claims that. We see Bali Maharaj had pledged to give Vamandev whatever he asked, and he did that despite the fact that Sukracharya told him he's going to take everything away. So he knew that, but he didn't renege on his promise. And for a Kshatriya, it's a little different standard between Kshatriyas and Brahmanas. For Brahmanas, their standard is that they are forgiving and they are knowledgeable about spiritual life. Those are kind of qualities that are foremost in Brahmanas. Whereas for Kshatriyas, their qualities are the courage in battle and never wincing or welching on their words. So if a Kshatriya goes against his word, it's kind of worse than dying, So therefore, we see this theme. And the reason Kshatriyas are so focused on their word is because with the Kshatriya, he's supposed to be speaking according to Dharma. And if he speaks according to Dharma, that means if he makes a pledge, that pledge is dharmic. And therefore, he's the one who's upholding Dharma. The way that the material world is supposed to work is that we have this system of karma and dharma that when a person does correct things, works according to scripture, he does punya, he gets rewarded. When a person does improper things, what we call papa, sinful activity, he gets demerits and later suffers. And there is a karmic system, sort of like a mechanical arrangement that enforces that to some extent. We see that the demigods are there to enforce that. And as a matter of fact, that's one of the main purposes of the demigods. And that's why Yamaraj has such a key role among the demigods, because he's the main arbiter of a person's individual good and bad future as a result of what they've done. Now, this gets further subcontracted to Kshatriyas. They are a further, kind of tiered down of this dharma karma system, So they're supposed to understand what should be done. They're supposed to understand what's proper in a particular situation, and they're supposed to understand when there's a threat of some kind or another. So Kshatriyas are supposed to meet all these kind of challenges, and therefore, for a Kshatriya, their honor is very paramount, because their honor isn't just that they're egoistic about it, but their honor means that they have never said something that was adharmic, nor have they said something that they couldn't fulfill. So these are all demerits for Kshatriya. The same way a Brahmana, if a Brahmana said something untruthful or something not according to Shastra, or acted in some kind of low way or whatever it is, these are demerits for a Brahman. So it kind of works like that, the dharma karma system, the demigods and the Kshatriyas.
Thank you so much. That's a very helpful explanation.
Hare Krishna. Yeah.
How did Sita handle getting banished?
What's that?
How did Sita handle getting banished? What was her reaction?
Well, she was, of course, bereaved by the idea of no longer being able to connect with her husband. But she had two sons, Kusha and Lava, so she raised them. And because they were in the ashram of Valmiki, Valmiki composed the Ramayana, and he taught it to Kusha and Lava. And eventually Kusha and Lava wandered throughout the kingdom reciting the Ramayana. And everyone that heard it was amazed by it. And eventually word got back to Ramachandra himself that there were these two young men wandering throughout the kingdom, reciting this big poem called the Ramayana about you. And so he said, well, let me hear it. So he had them come, and then he realized that they were his actual sons. He'd never met them because they grew up in exile with their mother.
Rama handled living in the kingdom with no wife?
Well, he did it somehow or other. I think Ramachandra ruled for something like 48,000 years or something like that, some kind of enormous length of time. I don't remember the exact figure, but his rule was considered so wonderful that it was like the perfect example of government. He did only what was necessary. He encouraged the citizens to act in a very spiritually oriented way, and as a result, there was a lot of prosperity, and they were not engaged in any kind of protracted, horrible warfare, as a result of all the auspicious things that he did and the way he ran things. The citizens loved him, nobody envied him, and everybody was ready to do what he wanted. So these are all examples of a sort of archetypal, top-of-the-line ruler. So even today, people talk about Ayodhya. Even Western people sometimes study. I saw that there were some studies done of the Ramayana to see what it was about Ramachandra that made him such an ideal ruler. So that was how his kingdom was described, as he was described as an ideal ruler.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thanks for the nectar class, and please accept my humble obeisances. I was wondering, and it's kind of I don't necessarily know how to word it that well, but when Krishna appears as like Lord Ramachandra or any of his direct incarnations, or he sets forth a plan for the material world, is he just doing his pastimes? Like, how does providence really get explained?
How is what?
Providence, like for
Right.
like when they make like a statement and that sets forth the entire story that's about to come, what's like actually going on with like?
Well, whenever Krishna comes in any incarnation, partly what he's doing is setting up a situation where people can come in contact with him and be attracted to go back to the spiritual world. But at the same time, he's enjoying. He's creating a pastime. And that pastime may be, in some cases, he's demonstrating what an ideal something or another is, like Lord Chaitanya came to demonstrate the ideal sannyasi or the ideal devotee, and Lord Ramachandra came to demonstrate the ideal king. Of course, Prithu was another demonstration of the ideal king. So you have this kind of thing. But at the same time, he's enjoying. Now, there's not quite as much Leela in Lord Ramachandra's pastimes because, Lord Ramachandra kept himself to one wife, and he kept himself very straightforward. Krishna didn't bother with any of those restrictions. Krishna does what he wants, because he's actually the Supreme Lord. So sometimes, especially people coming from India, they feel a little embarrassed about Krishna, and they feel very, very prideful about Ramachandra, because Ramachandra seems to follow what we recognize as morality in the strictest sense, But Krishna is the source of all morality, so whatever he does is moral by very definition. But because people don't understand why Krishna does some of the things he does, then they feel embarrassed about Krishna. So you have that situation.
And my last question is, how does free will factor into these pastimes, specifically with Lord Ramachandra, and like when he talks to Parashuram Muni about the Vishnu book and the bow?
Yeah, we
and
were
he
just
says
talking
that
about free will last night.
He might have to kill you, or he might have to kill you if you can't string the bow or something. Like, how does that?
Say that again?
You said that if he talked to Lord Ramachandra and said that if you can't string this bow, then I might have to kill you because
Right.
you're like. But that seems to me, I don't know. It's pretty.
Well, Parasuram did not recognize who Ramachandra was at first. So he saw him as just another possibly arrogant Kshatriya who he had already finished off, so many times in the past. So he'd heard about Ramachandra, but he wasn't sure who he was. But when Lord Ramachandra strung the bow of Vishnu and pointed the arrow, then he could understand that this was the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, free will is always there, but the Supreme Lord can engineer a pastime in such a way that certain aspects of it will come to pass. How a particular individual does or does not fit into it, that's all, according to their free will. A person can become interested and want to participate, to serve the Supreme Lord, or a person can join the other side and become very adverse to the Supreme Lord. So that we have free will. But the Supreme Lord tends to follow these various kinds of themes, and we hear that the Supreme Lord comes in many incarnations, and these incarnations have leelas. These various leelas then are usually kind of boilerplated. He does the same kind of leela again at a later time, and his next time around as he comes. They're not exactly repeated because that would be pointless, and it would also assume that everybody would be roboted exactly, moment to moment, motion for motion, everything that they'd done previously. But it doesn't work like that. Just the basic structure of the Leela is there, but individual, details and permutations are also there. So it's not just a replay of the previous one.
And sorry, for Ravana, was he compelled by his karma or his desires to act in a way that he was like inappropriate to all these people that cursed him, or was that directly part of Krishna's engineering so that the pastime?
Well, to understand Ravana, you have to go back to the fact that Ravana and Kumbhakarna are Jai and Vijay. We go back to the Bhagavatam, where we learn that Jai and Vijay are the gatekeepers to Vaikuntha, and they were cursed by the four Kumaras. But actually, Jai and Vijay had understood the mind that Krishna wanted to engage in chivalrous pastimes, but they understood that there were no powerful demons, so they volunteered for the role. And they were kind of made over as demoniac intelligence, and they reciprocated with the Lord by being his adversaries. So sometimes we think of, Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha, Kumbhakarna and Ravana as straight-up demons. And other times we think of them as actually the devotees of the Lord playing the role of demons. Now, since these pastimes happen recurringly, as I was just discussing, sometimes Jai and Vijay are not, Kumbhakarna and Ravana. Sometimes they're actually just demons, and sometimes they are, because this pastime with Ramachandra happens every time Ramachandra appears, and the pastimes with Krishna happen every time Krishna appears. So there are these individual variables that can or cannot be there, or can be altered to some extent.
Thank you.
But as far as I know, in this particular case, this Ravana and this Kumbhakarna were Jai and Vijay. And then later on they become Dantavakra and Shishupal, and then finally they become Jagai and Madai, and then they go back to the spiritual world. So they came in supposedly 3 incarnations, but they got a bonus 4th incarnation with Jagai and Madai in Lord Chaitanya's pastimes.
So Ravana, he's a devotee playing the role of a demon, but then I see the casualties of Ravana. Is that just their karma? Is that kind of like if you're in the material world, a demon can just come and just fulfill your karma? How does that work?
Well, everybody has a trajectory in the material world depending on their mentality and their action. So mostly people are going down. That's kind of, unfortunately, the way it works for most people. The only thing that bumps a person going up is when they bump into a devotee, and that's why Sankirtan is so important, because otherwise there's no hope. Krishna doesn't interfere with people's free will, so if you want to ignore God, he's not going to force himself on you. He will certainly give you the results of your bad karma. That's another thing, that will happen. But you will not understand why the whole system is doing what it's doing, because you are voluntarily in ignorance. And so we have free will and we have karma. And as a result of our karma, usually we're heading in a downward slope. But if a person takes up spiritual process and they start heading upward again, it's just a matter of time before they become fully cleansed. Was that your question? Or?
That's pretty much good enough, because I guess I was curious thinking about like the women who got kidnapped, and in the sages too, who are trying to do their offerings, and they just
Right.
get feces thrown at them.
Well, sometimes Krishna, as we've seen, just because you're a devotee doesn't mean nothing bad ever happens to you. Or at least what other people would call bad. If you're a genuine, very deeply mature devotee, then even when apparently calamities are happening to you, you are not very disturbed by them because you're focused within. And you are not challenged by material difficulty. But partly sometimes because of a pastime, Krishna might give somebody what appears to be a calamity, like Parikshit Maharaj. He was put the dead snake around the sage's shoulders, and as a result he was cursed by Shringi to be bitten by a snake bird and die in 7 days. So that's a calamity. And he was a devotee. And we see the Pandavas. They were doing everything right, but they got banished into the forest for 13 years, and so on and so forth. So these are all parts of the situation. Sometimes things are happening because we're actually doing something wrong. Even as a devotee, you can get some tough love from Krishna if you do the wrong thing. Or Krishna might want you to become purified, so he gives you special mercy, which is, kind of hot sauce mercy, So and sometimes, there's other things going on. So all those things are, that's why, I usually talk about karma 101, karma 201, and karma 301, because if you understand all those three tiers, you can see that one of those things applies somewhere along the line. Yeah. Let's let Narada Muni ask his question, then we can go to you.
It really wasn't a question. I just wanted to add a comment. 'Cause
Okay.
you said something really nice. Does God won't force himself upon you? And so
what?
you said that God won't force himself upon you.
Yeah.
So like the basis of free will. But then I was thinking too, if this, please correct me if this is incorrect, but I wrote down, God won't force himself upon you, but when you lovingly surrender to him, he won't know how to let go.
Right.
I thought I should say
So Krishna is just reciprocating, right? So if we want to connect with Krishna, Krishna will become very very attached to us. But Similarly, if we don't want to relate to Krishna, Krishna will keep himself distant from us. So it's actually up to us. We're calling the shot there. Okay, now Mathura Vilasini.
Thank you, Maharaj. Maharaj, when Ravan went to the forest and forced on the woman who was living alone in a forest, and she killed herself, threw herself in the fire. So, and she cursed Ravan that if you force in another woman, again you will die. So why after that he went to the heavenly planet and he forced on the woman demigod and then he didn't die? And the demigod cursed him again, if you force in another woman, then you will die.
Right, right.
So why didn't he die the first time? Same thing, because...
She actually, I'm glad you brought that up. I think that is, what I said was not exactly correct about that. That Vedavati did curse Ravana, but I don't remember what the curse was exactly, because later on Ramba is the one and her husband who cursed Ravana that if he forces himself on a woman, he will die. And that's why he tried to convince Sita Devi to be romantically associated with him, and he didn't force himself on her. Otherwise, he might have done that, you know. So, but I'll have to recheck what it was that there was a particular curse that Vedavati gave Ravana, but I think it was different because I know that the two curses weren't the same, the one that Vedavati gave and the one that Ramba gave. But Ramba's definitely was the one that if he tried to force himself on a woman, then he would immediately die.
Maharaj, I think it was Vedavati cursed Ravana, saying that she will be the cause of his death, and she comes as the Maya Sita.
Oh, right, right. She would be the cause of his, right, right. And she becomes who?
The Maya Sita. Maya Sita. So actually whom Ravana kidnaps, it's not Sita. It's actually the resemblance of Sita. It's actually Vedavati.
I see. Oh, really?
Yeah.
I don't remember reading that. That's interesting. Okay, at any rate, I thank you all for your extended kind attention today. All glories to Ramachandra, all glories to Sita, Ram, Lakshman, Hanuman, all the Vaishnava devotees, Radha Govinda Dev, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Okay.